Hello to the Underground Army, and thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel, the U.S. History Underground. We're going to forego our usual approach of focusing on a single event or a more narrow time period. So today on the podcast, democratization in the first half of the 19th century. Hi, I'm Mr. O'Hagan, and I'm joined as always by Mr. Zagari.
How we doing, folks?
Zags, historians discuss this time period, 1800 to 1850, by simultaneously using headings like the market revolution, antebellum reform, era of the common man.
Don't forget the age of Jackson.
Yeah, they do use that one, but we talked about in class why it's a bad title. So why so many titles? Is there, with apologies to Lord of the Rings, one title to rule them all?
I'm not sure a single title would be useful. This is a really diverse time period, and no single title is likely to give students insight into all of it. Those titles all represent a different focus. The market revolution points to economic changes. Antebellum reform spotlights the social issues and developments of the era. And remember, folks, antebellum, remembering that that's defined as the time period between the War of 1812 and the Civil Rights Movement.
Civil War, not
Civil
Rights
War.
Movement.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Civil War.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We also see developments of the era with women's rights, temperance, and abolition. The era of the common man might actually be the broadest title, but it almost always emphasizes the political changes going on. Historians use these titles as cues to their readers, a way for them to categorize which topic they are going to highlight in that era.
All right, so no to a title. Maybe that's not going to work for us. But is there a central theme that might work?
Sure, the theme angle is more useful. Let's think of a concept that runs through the whole time period in multiple categories, which in turn helps students in their DBQ, your LEQ, your civic literacy writing, wink, wink. This can all help us throughout any of our writing. The theme here is democratization. It could be used as an umbrella to encompass all the titles or cues for the reader.
Zags, don't we still need to be careful, though, because democratization, that's generally a political term.
True, but we can co-opt the term a bit and categorize them as economic democratization or social democratization. Democracy is about people having power to make choices, and this time period expands people's decision-making power. More people are voting, well, that's political. But more people are also choosing their careers and aren't necessarily bound by the class they were born into. That's economic decision-making. And our symbol of this is Lincoln as the self-made man. That's what we have to think about as that representation.
I see where you're going with this. I mean, the social reformers of the era, like William Lloyd Garrison, Horace Mann, Dorothea Dix, they're taking it upon themselves to make changes, not waiting for the government officials to step in. So private citizens pushing for reforms, that's demonstrating kind of ownership over their own lives and the society they live in. That's social decision-making then.
Precisely. It is the idea expressed during the Second Great Awakening that demonstrates the word democratization more thematically, beyond its more straightforward political implications.
But even a theme can be misleading, right? If a student thinks it covers everything in the period, right? So even like the term democratization, which we started with, it covers a lot more potentially, or students need to understand that it covers more than just that narrow definition.
Definitely. And this is something that College Board builds into its DBQs and LEQ rubrics. We call it, ready folks, nuance.
Ooh.
Nuance is demonstrated when one is able to identify layers to every story, alternative developments and ideas in every time period.
All right, well then let's offer a counterpoint, a more nuanced view of the time period. How does this broad democratization brush fail to really paint a complete picture? Which perspectives might offer us a view of the time period where this growth and advancement in decision-making isn't happening or being enjoyed?
Well, one obvious example is slavery and Southern society in general. What could be more undemocratic than a slave hierarchy? And that social pyramid in the South took away real chances for social mobility for poor and middle class whites too. The big lie was that if you were white, you could rise to the top of society. That wasn't going to happen in reality. There was no land left in the South to be purchased to start your own plantation. Hence why Southern society instituted the color line, as some historians would argue. If anything, you had to leave the South to try to make that happen. This meant that economic democratization is a non-entity in the South.
So I'm thinking in terms of this democratization, I'm thinking of voting for non-whites and women, right? Political democratization in this time period, at least by 21st century standards, is pretty limited.
The Bingham painting that we've highlighted in class is an incomplete picture. Not everyone gets to be part of Election Day.
That's very true. And it reminds me of this excerpt from the Declaration of Sentiments, which came out of the Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls in 1848. Listen to this. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. These Seneca Falls activists, they see this political democratization going on around them, and this really indicates that they're ticked off that they've been left out. Even men who are less worthy have been given an opening that these women have not.
And don't forget about the social construct known as the cult of domesticity during this time period. There are very specific and limited ideas about what roles women should assume in society: wife, mother, homemaker. I think the term cult galvanizes this idea. Women are tied to the home and are unable to, quote, get out, close quote. At least with the Republican motherhood, as we saw in the 18th century, it gave women a sense of political purpose for the infant republic. There is a bit more nuance with this, however. While the Republican motherhood did foster the idea of education for women, it also solidified female roles in society as homemakers, mothers, etc., contradicting the fundamental ideas of the American Revolution for that time period.
Zags, you mentioned the South before as a place where economic democratization isn't going on. We probably shouldn't over-romanticize the market revolution's economic growth and opportunity for people living in the North. It wasn't totally inclusive for them either, was it?
No, not at all. This was the ultimate gamble. People failed at business. There were difficult conditions for urban workers.
Yeah, listen to George Fitzhugh. He was a Virginia slave owner and author who actually condemns the situation of workers in the North, irony, as a slave owner, as a way to make his case for slavery. Listen to this. The free laborer must work or starve. He is more of a slave than the Negro because he works longer and harder for less allowance than the slave and has no holiday because the cares of his life with him begin when his labors end. He has no liberty and not a single right.
Wow.
Okay, so we can call BS on Fitzhugh for his paternalistic and skewed version of the life of slaves, but he's not completely wrong about the difficulties faced by workers, right? And the limits of their ability to make decisions about their own life and to have, a broader opportunity for economic growth.
I mean, we see there is an ugly nativism during this time period, too. America is a land open to everyone if you were to ask, such as like the Know Nothing Party, aka the American Party. That position hardly represents a very free democratic sensibility. The bigotry against religious groups is especially stark. Listen to Samuel Morse contemplating the idea of more Catholics entering the country.
Samuel Morse, the telegraph guy?
That's him.
Same guy? Okay.
Same guy.
Let's hear this one.
So, is there no danger to the democracy of the country from such formidable foes arrayed against it? Oh, there is no danger to democracy. For those most devoted to the Pope, the Roman Catholics, are all on the side of democracy. Yes, to be sure they are on the side of democracy. They are just where I should look for them. Judas Iscariot joined with the true disciples. He said this in 1835.
Wow, Sam, angry and sarcastic much? I mean, he's really, highlighting in a very sarcastic and contradictory way that he doesn't think the Roman Catholics are on the side of democracy at all. He sees them as a real threat. I mean, that runs counter to this idea of greater opportunity and equality, doesn't it?
I mean, Wow is right. This really personifies that the alligator eating Pope's cartoon that we showed in class with
the Thomas Nast cartoon.
the Thomas Nast cartoon with the invasion, if you will, of immigrants, of Catholic immigrants coming to the shores of America and harming the young youth of the nation.
Yeah, really not a real swell notion of democratization.
Not at all.
We didn't even get to it, but the Mexican War in 1848, spoiler, that's in the next chapter, Native Americans who suffered through the Indian removal and the Trail of Tears, failed reform movements like utopianism. I mean, any and all of these topics could be used as a counterpoint to this idea of democratization sweeping the country too, right? Absolutely. So, Zags, what do we think the big takeaway is here in terms of content for students?
So, when thinking about democratization as a whole, we see a time period when people are taking control over their political, social, and economic life. The Bingham painting serves as the perfect symbol of the changing time period of the early to mid 19th century, especially compared to the Trumbull painting. But in reality, the painting still has gaps in it. There are groups that are not represented in the county election. As the United States grows as a nation, we have constantly looked to add faces to the Bingham painting and have a more inclusive democracy, more representative of paragraph 2 of the Declaration. In 2023, roughly 200 years since this era of the common man, we should ask what the county election would look like now, and what would it look like in the future?
I think another big question we want to ask is, will we continue to democratize in this way as a nation? 50 years, 100 years from now, you're talking about the future. Are people going to look back at us and say, look at the people they were limiting in 2023. Look at the way that, this group or that group, who we don't even think of as being part of this democratic picture. I wonder if, 100 years in the future, we're going to be looked back on as the ones who have taken away that opportunity for others.
Absolutely. It's such a enduring question that we're going to see just throughout even our course of the remainder of part of the year.
I think College Board and New York State might call this a continuity in American history.
There
right?
we go.
That big question about who we add to the picture. Well, maybe we should focus a little on skills, since you just did a nice summation of the content for us, Zags. I think from College Board's perspective, certainly, this is a great way to think about nuance. And, for New York State, for Regents writing for the civic readiness, wrong one. What do we call it? The civic literacy essay.
Civic literacy, yes.
Sorry.
Yep.
The civic literacy essay is still going to ask you to offer a little bit more of a nuanced view of these kinds of things. So I think in this particular topic, starting out with democratization and highlighting all the ways that people had more opportunities, and then being able to explain the ways in which people didn't have opportunities at the same time, showing both sides of the issue, I think that's really a way to show nuance. Knowing multiple sides of a topic is going to allow you to do that. So again, being able to show the ways in which we democratized and the ways people were limited in that democratization, I think gives you that layer, it gives you that onion, to be able to say, I understand a lot of different facets of this topic and this discussion.
That's why we put Shrek in that original PowerPoint.
That's right. Ogres are like onions, and
That's it.
And so is history. You got to know the layers. Well, I think that's all for us, so thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to check out all the great videos, content spotlights, and podcasts for your U.S. history course on this YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Underground Army, dismissed.